People don't realize how fast small behaviors can downgrade their whole image. You can dress well, speak well, even present yourself well, but if your etiquette slips, people immediately place you in a lower category without saying a word. These aren't fancy manners or high society rules. These are everyday choices that silently communicate how you see yourself and how much respect you carry. And a man who values himself never lets these small mistakes make him look low class. The way you treat people in small moments exposes your real class because those tiny interactions reveal what you value when no one is grading you or applauding you. Anyone can act composed when the pressure is high and the spotlight is on, but your true standards show up in the quick moments that feel insignificant. It's how you talk to someone who can't benefit you, how you respond when you're slightly inconvenienced, how you behave when patience is running thin. These are the moments that separate a man who has genuine class from a man who only performs it. People pay attention to how you handle these small exchanges, often more than they notice your achievements or your appearance. A man who wants to be respected has to realize that class isn't something you put on like clothing. It has to come from the way you consistently carry yourself. When you dismiss someone because you think they don't matter, you reveal that your standards are conditional. When you get irritated over something minor, you reveal that your control is fragile. When you overlook basic courtesy, you reveal that your confidence is shallow. In every small interaction, people are observing how grounded you are, how disciplined you are, and how much self-respect you bring into the room. These small moments test your patience, your emotional maturity, and your ability to operate with quiet strength. And that matters because high-class behavior isn't about status or money. It is about the way you choose to show up in the world, especially when the situation doesn't demand anything from you. Anyone can say they are a good person, but small moments show whether your actions actually match your words. A man who knows his value doesn't treat people differently based on what they can give him. He carries the same respect, the same calmness, and the same discipline whether he's talking to a stranger or someone important. He knows that self-control is one of the most powerful forms of class because it shows the world he isn't ruled by impulse or ego. Small kindnesses are never small to people who receive them, and small disrespect is never small to people who witness it. The way you navigate these interactions becomes your reputation long before your skills or accomplishments ever do. When you interrupt others, when you talk over people, when you brush someone off because you're distracted, when you refuse to make eye contact because you're in a rush, all of that signals that you lack awareness and emotional intelligence. Class is built on self-awareness, and self-awareness is built on noticing how your presence affects people. When you speak gently, even when frustrated, when you offer clarity instead of sarcasm, when you choose patience instead of irritation, people remember it because most people don't behave that way. You stand out without trying to stand out. That subtlety is power. People also watch how you treat individuals you interact with only for seconds. The waiter, the security guard, the cashier, the cleaner, the delivery person. A man who maintains class knows that these interactions matter because they show whether your respect is authentic or performed. People with real self-respect don't need a reason to treat others well. It's just who they are. And when you consistently show up with that level of composure, it communicates that you are stable, grounded, and emotionally disciplined. This is the kind of man people trust, admire, and want to follow. Small moments are the truest test because they are spontaneous. You don't prepare for them, you don't rehearse them, and you don't filter them. They reveal your instincts, your values, and your emotional strength. That is why a man who wants to elevate himself pays close attention to these moments. He understands that class is built in the details, in the tone of voice he uses, in the patience he practices, in the way he carries himself, even when no one important is watching. These small choices shape your character, your reputation, and the level of respect people naturally give you. The truth about low-class behavior is that it rarely shows up in the words someone chooses, but almost always in the reactions they can't control. The way a man reacts under pressure, irritation, or discomfort reveals far more about him than anything he intentionally says. Anyone can rehearse polished language or pretend to have composure, but reactions happen in real time, without filters, and that's where your real upbringing, discipline, and self-respect show themselves. A man who snaps quickly, takes everything personally, or becomes loud and defensive over the smallest things exposes a lack of emotional grounding. People notice this instantly because reactions tell the world what triggers you, what controls you, and where your insecurities live. When your reactions are messy, unpredictable, or overly dramatic, you send the message that you don't have authority over yourself. And nothing makes someone look lower class than being ruled by impulse instead of intention. People trust men who can stay centered, not men who fall apart at minor inconveniences. A low-class reaction often has nothing to do with volume or aggression. Sometimes it's the silent gestures that reveal the most. The eye rolls, the sighs, the passive-aggressive tone, the sudden shift in energy when something doesn't go your way. These reactions show that your emotional maturity is fragile. When you let frustration leak into every moment, you show people that your peace can be stolen by anything or anyone. A man who wants to carry real presence has to understand that the power lies in choosing his response, not defaulting to it. Because when you react without thinking, you're no longer in control of your behavior. Your emotions are. People instantly categorize you based on how you handle friction, conflict, or unexpected situations. If you get loud, if you get petty, if you get disrespectful, if you get visibly irritated, it becomes hard for people to take you seriously. They might not say it out loud, but in their minds, they label you as someone with low standards. A man of class knows that his reactions set the tone in every room he walks into. He doesn't need to prove himself through anger or defensiveness because he understands that reacting explosively actually lowers his power. When someone tries to provoke him, he doesn't immediately fire back. He evaluates. When someone speaks disrespectfully, he doesn't match their energy. He chooses his own. When a situation becomes tense, he becomes calmer, not louder. That contrast is what separates a grounded man from a reactive one. People feel safer and more respectful around someone who has self-control, and that respect grows quietly over time. Your reaction becomes a message. It tells others whether you are stable or shaky, whether you are intentional or impulsive, whether you operate from confidence or insecurity. The smaller the trigger that sets you off, the lower you look to the outside world. Every reaction you give also teaches people how to treat you. If someone can push your buttons easily, they'll keep pushing them. If someone can get a rise out of you quickly, they'll know how to manipulate you. But when your reactions stay measured, when your tone stays steady, when your presence stays controlled even during stress, people think twice before crossing you. Not because you're threatening, but because you're unpredictable in the calmest way. They don't know what you're thinking, and that uncertainty is powerful. It makes people respect boundaries without you ever demanding them. A high-class man realizes that the more control he has over his reactions, the more influence he has over outcomes. You can turn conflict into clarity, disrespect into distance, and irritation into strategy simply by choosing to respond instead of react. And that difference becomes your signature. It tells the world you are a man of discipline, maturity, and self-respect every time life tests your patience. Quiet confidence is always louder than messy etiquette because it carries a presence that doesn't need to be announced or defended. A man who walks with quiet confidence doesn't have to demand attention, correct people, or prove anything. His presence speaks before he does. This kind of confidence shows up in how he stands, how he listens, how he thinks before he moves, and how he doesn't let the behavior of others pull him off center. When a man has real confidence, he doesn't need validation to feel grounded. He doesn't rely on loudness, arrogance, or flashy behavior to look important. Instead, his strength comes from being so sure of who he is that he doesn't have to perform for anyone. And people instantly recognize this kind of energy because it is rare. Most people perform confidence. Very few embody it. That's why quiet confidence immediately looks high class, while messy etiquette exposes insecurity. Messy etiquette shows up when a man tries too hard to look powerful or respected. It's the loud bragging, the unnecessary dominance in conversations, the constant need to be right, the habit of interrupting people, the exaggerated body language meant to intimidate. These are all signs of someone who lacks inner stability. When you have to force your presence, it's because you fear that no one will notice it on their own. Confidence that comes from insecurity always spills out in messy ways. But a man with quiet confidence understands that power doesn't require noise. He can sit in a room silently and still be the one people notice because he isn't competing for attention. He already owns his space. His presence is calm, controlled, and respectful, and people are naturally drawn to that without him lifting a finger. Quiet confidence also shows up in how a man handles uncertainty. Instead of panicking, rushing, or overreacting, he slows down. Instead of filling silence with meaningless talk, he uses silence as a tool. Instead of trying to impress people, he focuses on understanding the moment. This grounded behavior creates a natural sense of authority because people trust someone who doesn't crumble under pressure. Messy etiquette, on the other hand, leans into panic. It tries to cover insecurity with noise, over-explanation, and unnecessary drama. When a man overcompensates, people feel it, and it lowers their respect for him. You can't fake calmness. You can't fake emotional stability. If you don't have it, it shows in every interaction, every reaction, every choice. But when you do have it, it communicates quality without effort. Quiet confidence is also rooted in respect. A man who respects himself doesn't act out to impress anyone. He doesn't speak over others to prove dominance. He doesn't show off to gain approval, and he doesn't behave recklessly to look bold. His dignity is consistent, whether he's in a room full of powerful people or standing alone. This kind of self-respect is what makes him appear high class because it shows discipline and emotional maturity. Messy etiquette, however, reveals a man who isn't secure in who he is. When someone is quick to show off, quick to argue, quick to escalate small issues, he exposes how fragile his confidence really is. People see through it instantly. They know it isn't real strength, but an attempt to mask a lack of inner control. Quiet confidence has another layer. It gives people space. A grounded man doesn't rush to fill every silence, doesn't dominate conversations, and doesn't make everything about himself. He listens, he observes, he speaks with intention, not impulse. And this creates a powerful contrast because most people are constantly reacting, performing, or trying to impress. When a man doesn't do any of that, he stands out. His calmness becomes influence. His restraint becomes strength. His silence becomes presence. And his presence communicates that he is a man who doesn't need external approval to feel valuable. That is the essence of high-class behavior. It's not about being perfect. It's about being stable, thoughtful, and controlled in a world full of noise. When your confidence is quiet, people pay attention without you asking. When your etiquette is messy, people dismiss you without saying a word. People judge your standards before they judge your words because your standards are visible long before you ever speak. They show up in the way you move, the way you treat people, the way you maintain yourself, and the way you handle situations that test your patience. A man's standards are like a silent introduction. People pick up on them instantly, and they often decide who you are based on the level of discipline and self-respect you carry. You can say all the right things, but if your behavior doesn't match the image you want to project, people believe what your standards reveal, not what your words claim. Standards are reflected in the smallest details, and the world notices those details far more than you think. How you present yourself, the choices you make, and the boundaries you keep or fail to keep tell people everything they need to know about your character and your class. Your standards are the foundation of your reputation. They determine how people treat you, how they talk about you, and whether they see you as someone to respect or someone to overlook. When your standards are high, you naturally carry yourself in ways that communicate strength and consistency. People can see it in how you dress, how you speak, how you keep your space, how you manage your energy, and how you respond to disrespect. When your standards are low, it becomes obvious in the way you tolerate things you shouldn't, the people you surround yourself with, the habits you allow to slide, and the way you handle conflict. You don't have to announce what your standards are. People see them in the patterns you repeat. A man who lets everything slide looks like a man who doesn't expect much from himself. A man who accepts chaos, drama, or disrespect looks like a man who has never learned to value his time or his peace. And once people see that, they act accordingly. A man with strong standards doesn't need to tell anyone he has them. They show up in his boundaries. They show up in his discipline. They show up in his refusal to act out of impulse. When someone tries to pull him into gossip or negativity, he doesn't participate. When someone tries to test his patience, he responds with clarity, not chaos. When someone tries to push past his limits, he stands his ground without becoming aggressive. This steady behavior creates a clear message. He is not someone you take advantage of. He is not someone you disrespect, and he is not someone who operates without intention. People feel that. They don't have to hear it. They just observe it. And once they see that you hold yourself to a higher standard, they naturally rise to meet it or remove themselves. Either way, you win. Your standards also determine the quality of your relationships. People who lack discipline are drawn to environments where chaos is normal, but people with high standards attract people who value stability and purpose. When you carry yourself with intention, it becomes harder for low-quality behavior to stay around you. People sense that you don't tolerate disrespect, laziness, inconsistency, or emotional games, and they either adjust or drift away. You don't have to force anything because your standards do the filtering for you. This not only protects your peace, but also elevates your environment. The people you choose, the conversations you allow, and the energy you welcome all reflect the level of class you're building within yourself. And when others see this, they immediately know the kind of man they're dealing with. Even your silence communicates your standards. The things you don't respond to, the behaviors you don't entertain, the arguments you don't engage in, all tell people that your time is too valuable to waste. When a man is selective about what he gives his attention to, it shows that he respects himself. Low-class behavior always comes from a lack of self-respect, which leads to reacting to everything, chasing validation, and tolerating nonsense. High-class behavior comes from knowing your worth, which leads to choosing your battles carefully, staying intentional with your actions, and refusing to compromise your values. People notice that level of discipline because it sets you apart from the crowd. In a world where most people operate without standards, the man who builds his life on them becomes impossible to ignore because his presence speaks louder than his words ever could. Self-respect is the foundation of every high-class action because it is the root that shapes how you carry yourself, how you think, how you speak, how you set boundaries, and how you navigate the world. A man who respects himself doesn't have to force confidence, pretend to be someone he's not, or seek approval from people who don't value him. His behavior automatically elevates because it comes from a place of inner stability, not performance. When you respect yourself, you naturally adopt habits that protect your time, your peace, and your reputation. You become selective with your reactions, not because you're trying to look superior, but because you understand that your energy is too valuable to waste on things that don't elevate you. Self-respect becomes the invisible armor that keeps you aligned, composed, and disciplined in environments where others easily lose themselves. A man with self-respect doesn't let emotions control his decisions. He doesn't act out of desperation, anger, or insecurity because he knows that reacting impulsively always weakens his position. Instead, he gives himself space to think, to breathe, and to respond with intention. That level of restraint is what makes him stand out. People can sense when a man operates from inner strength instead of ego. They see it in how he handles disrespect without lowering himself, how he walks away from chaos without guilt, and how he protects his standards even when he's tempted to compromise them. Low-class behavior almost always comes from a lack of self-respect. When a man doesn't value himself, he chases attention, overreacts to everything, tolerates people who drain him, and abandons his boundaries just to feel accepted. But when a man carries self-respect, he becomes harder to manipulate, harder to provoke, and harder to access without sincerity. Self-respect also shows up in the things a man refuses to tolerate. When you know your worth, you don't entertain disrespectful behavior because you understand that accepting it teaches people how to treat you. You don't stay in situations that diminish your dignity because you know your environment shapes your character. You don't argue to prove your value because you know your value isn't up for debate. This quiet firmness becomes a part of your identity. It influences how people approach you, how they speak to you, and how they regard you. A man who respects himself doesn't beg for attention, doesn't chase validation, and doesn't cling to people who don't reciprocate. He gives his energy to places where it's valued, not drained. And that decision alone separates him from the masses because most people spend their lives trying to impress others instead of honoring themselves. Self-respect also affects how you maintain yourself physically, emotionally, and mentally. A man who values himself takes care of his appearance, not out of vanity, but because he understands that presentation is part of self-discipline. He keeps his environment clean, not for others, but because chaos disrupts clarity. He invests in his growth, not for applause, but because he knows stagnation kills potential. People see this. They see the difference between a man who takes pride in the way he lives and a man who lets life happen to him. The more you honor yourself, the more naturally you elevate. You don't have to say you have standards. People see it in the way you move through the world. Self-respect is also reflected in how a man deals with relationships. He doesn't chase people who don't value him because he understands that anyone who truly wants to be in his life will meet him with consistency. He doesn't try to fix people who refuse to fix themselves because he knows that responsibility isn't his to carry. He doesn't tolerate emotional games because he knows his peace is too important to gamble with. This level of emotional maturity makes him look high class without trying. It communicates that his value comes from within, not from who approves of him. People naturally treat a man better when he treats himself better, and that's because self-respect sets the tone for every interaction he has. When he walks into a room, people pick up on his confidence, his boundaries, and his stability long before he ever speaks. His demeanor tells the world that he knows who he is, what he deserves, and what he refuses to accept. And that silent message becomes his greatest strength, shaping how others perceive him and how he moves through life with clarity, dignity, and purpose.